My twin sister and I are both the daughters of the Prime Minister, we share the same face, yet mother only favors my poised and composed sister. When I was decreed to become the Empress, mother not only failed to rejoice for me but also accused me of blocking my sister's path to the throne, thus risking the extermination of our entire clan. She heartlessly disfigured and murdered me. Then I let my elder sister enter the palace as the Empress in my name. I ended up with no trace of my remains. While my sister successfully gave birth to the Crown Prince and eventually ascended to the throne as the Empress Dowager, when I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day the eunuch came to the Prime Minister's residence to deliver the imperial decree. I secretly slipped 100 gold pieces to the decree-delivering eunuch, insisting he must inform the emperor that the real Qin Junjun had a red mole behind her ear. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. Mother, I heard portraits of all the daughters of ministers ranked 2nd grade or higher have been sent to the palace this time. With so many candidates, what if the Empress Dowager and His Majesty don't choose me? Elder sister Qin Jiaojiao tugged at her mother's hand, voicing her worries with a coquettish tone. Her mother gently smoothed the stray hairs at her forehead while softly reassuring her, "Don't worry. Our Jiaojiao is so beautiful and accomplished in every art, who wouldn't adore you at first sight?" Qin Jiaojiao wasn't soothed. Instead, she pouted with a hint of defiance. "If I can't become the Empress, I might as well die." Hearing this, her mother shot her a glare, though there was no real anger in her eyes. "Nonsense, if you die, what would your mother do?" "All right, Jiaojiao. The other day when mother entered the palace to see the Empress Dowager, Her Majesty kept holding my hand to ask about you. It seems she's quite pleased with you. The position of Empress will undoubtedly be our Jiaojiao's. It can only be our Jiaojiao's. Mother won't let anyone stand in your way." I sat quietly to the side, my face expressionless, yet beneath my sleeves, my hands were clenched into tight fists, nails digging so deep they pierced the skin, but this slight pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. Because the anyone in mother's words just now included me, her own daughter, in my past life. It was the same scene, the same conversation. To comfort the nervous Qin Jiaojiao, I kindly handed her a cup of hot tea. Who would have thought she would get up at that moment? I couldn't dodge in time, and some tea spilled on her sleeve. Without a word, she immediately pushed me to the ground, then pointed at my nose and shouted, "Qin Jiaojiao, did you do that on purpose? Pouring such scalding tea on me, are you trying to disfigure me so you can become the Empress yourself?" Just as I was about to explain, mother slapped me hard across the face. "Qin Junjun, how could I have raised such a vicious daughter? Jiaojiao is your own sister. How dare you try to ruin her face?" I covered my swollen cheek with my hand, looking at my mother through tear-filled eyes. "Mother, I didn't do it," but she wouldn't listen to my explanation at all. "Shut up and get back to your own courtyard immediately, and don't even think about having dinner tonight." I could only return to my own courtyard with a heavy heart. From the moment Qin Jiaojiao and I were born, our mother's heart had already grown partial, simply because Qin Jiaojiao appeared more delicate than me. Our mother showered her with the greater share of maternal love. Since childhood, I had been taught by our mother to always yield to Qin Jiaojiao in everything. Anything Qin Jiaojiao liked, I wasn't even allowed to touch. As she grew up, Qin Jiaojiao not only had a sweet tongue but also excelled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, winning our mother's heart even more. But I had no interest in those things. I only loved wielding swords and spears. Mother thought I was an embarrassment to her, and what little affection she had for me was completely transferred to Qin Jiaojiao. She doted on Qin Jiaojiao as if she were a precious pearl, granting her every wish. Yet when it came to me, all I received were beatings and scoldings. I once tried to win my mother's favor by imitating Qin Jiaojiao's ways, but the more I tried to please her, the deeper her disgust for me grew. Later, I stopped actively seeking out my mother and Qin Jiaojiao, doing my best to become an invisible presence in the household. In my past life, when my mother learned that I was the one chosen to be Empress, she repeatedly questioned the decree-reading eunuch, asking if he had mistaken the person. Even after the eunuch confirmed it was indeed me, she still refused to believe it. She changed her clothes and went straight to the palace to seek out the Empress Dowager. The outcome remained unchanged. Qin Jiaojiao, unable to accept my imminent entry into the palace as the Empress, actually attempted to hang herself. That very night, my mother had me bound and taken to the woodshed. She used a knife to slash my face beyond recognition. Then had Qin Jiaojiao take my place in the wedding with the emperor. After Qin Jiaojiao successfully ascended to the position of Empress, she still worried that I, as a potential threat, might endanger her. She simply decided to go all the way and strangled me to death, until my dying breath. I couldn't understand why, as daughters of the same mother, she treated me with such cruelty. But in this new life, I won't allow myself to repeat the same mistakes and become Qin Jiaojiao's stepping stone again. In this lifetime, I didn't serve tea to Qin Jiaojiao, so naturally, I didn't spill any on her clothes, but that didn't stop my mother from disliking me. Qin Zhenzhen, what are you doing sitting here? Get back to your own courtyard. Just looking at you annoys me. Hearing my mother's baseless accusations and disdain, this time I didn't feel sad or regretful. Instead, I spoke calmly, Your Highness. I too would like to see which noble lady will become our dynasty's new empress. Upon hearing this, my mother snorted coldly, her tone growing even more displeased. You ungrateful wretch. The empress position can only belong to your elder sister. I glanced at the restless Qin Jiaojiao but said nothing more, but she caught my glance. She immediately rushed up to me and shouted, Qin Zhenzhen, what was that look just now? Don't you believe I can become the empress? I'm your own sister. How can you be so heartless? If I become the empress, you'll be able to marry into a good family too. Mother was right, you're nothing but an ungrateful wretch. Hearing Qin Jiaojiao's words, mother also flew into a rage. She slammed her hand heavily on the table beside her and was about to continue berating me when the steward came running in from outside, overjoyed. Madam, young mistress. Eunuch Li from the Empress Dowager's side has arrived, and is holding an imperial edict in his hands. Qin Jiaojiao's face lit up with joy, thinking it must be the edict appointing her as empress. Without a second thought, she dashed outside. Her mother, equally delighted, completely forgot about scolding me in her excitement. She hastily instructed the steward to prepare the customary reward for Eunuch Li. I squeezed the money pouch I had prepared long ago and let out a cold laugh. In my past life, when she heard that I was the one being crowned empress, not only did she withhold any reward money, she didn't even spare a smile for Eunuch Li. Since she wouldn't help me give it, I'd just prepare it for myself. When I arrived at the front hall, Eunuch Li's face was filled with shock at the sight of me and Qin Jiaojiao. We've long heard the Prime Minister's residence boasts a pair of celestial sisters, but who'd have thought they'd be identical twins? Before mother could speak, I cut in, Eunuch Li, my sister and I aren't completely identical. Mother shot me a venomous glare, cutting me off mid-sentence. You ill-mannered brat, Eunuch Li wasn't speaking to you. Who gave you the right to interrupt? Having said that, she immediately turned to Eunuch Li with an ingratiating smile. Eunuch Li, my youngest daughter here has been utterly spoiled by me and knows nothing of proper etiquette. My elder daughter Jiaojiao is much more sensible. But Eunuch Li merely waved his hand dismissively and walked toward me with a beaming smile. Are you the second Miss Qin? Qin Zhenzhen. Yes, Your Excellency. Eunuch Li immediately bowed to me. Congratulations, second Miss Qin. His Majesty the Emperor and Her Majesty the Empress Dowager have personally selected you to become the Empress of our dynasty. As the words fell, silence enveloped the grand hall. Then, even disregarding proper etiquette, mother directly grabbed hold of Eunuch Li's sleeve. Eunuch Li, have you made a mistake? I never even submitted Qin Zhenzhen's portrait. How could she possibly be chosen as empress? Hearing mother's somewhat frantic questioning, Eunuch Li froze momentarily. Logically speaking, whichever daughter of the family was crowned as empress should be considered an honor for the household. Yet the prime minister's wife before them not only showed no joy, but even appeared somewhat angry. It seems this new empress wasn't valued much in her own family. Eunuch Li subtly increased his distance from the mother, the smile on his face fading slightly. Madam, this servant knows nothing about the portrait matter, but the imperial decree clearly states that the second miss of the prime minister's residence, Qin Zhenzhen, is to be established as empress. If this servant were mistaken about the identity of the future empress, then this servant deserves death as atonement. If madam still doesn't believe, you may examine it yourself. Mother took the imperial decree and looked. Indeed, the three characters Qin Zhenzhen were clearly written there, and her expression grew increasingly grim. Seeing this, the butler hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to give the reward to Eunuch Li. He turned to look at his mother, only to meet her gloomy, furious eyes, which made him shrink back in fear and retreat to his original spot. His mother took a deep breath, then forced a smile and said to Eunuch Li, "Thank you for making the trip. Eunuch Li, knowing how busy you must be, we won't keep you for a meal at the mansion." Eunuch Li couldn't possibly miss the meaning behind his mother's words, and his face darkened instantly. Before coming, he had thought this would be a cushy job. Little did he expect to end up not only without a single coin of reward but also being driven out of the mansion. He let out an almost imperceptible cold snort before turning on his heel and leaving. I glanced at my mother, feeling waves of coldness surging from the depths of my heart. Eunuch Lee was the chief attendant by the Empress Dowager's side who wouldn't show him some courtesy by offending Eunuch Lee so blatantly. She clearly intended to make my life in the palace impossible. While my mother was comforting Qin Jiaojiao, I quietly slipped out of the front hall. Eunuch Lee, please wait a moment. My mother was rude earlier. I hope you'll be magnanimous and not take it to heart. As I spoke, I pressed the money pouch I had prepared into his hand. It contained nearly all of my savings. Eunuch Lee weighed the money pouch in his hand, and his gloomy expression immediately brightened considerably. Second Miss Qin possesses both grace and intelligence. No wonder the Empress Dowager and His Majesty are so fond of you. I smiled faintly and leaned slightly closer to Eunuch Lee, whispering, my sister and I look identical. It would be quite troublesome if people mistook me for her after entering the palace. Therefore, Your Excellency must inform the Empress Dowager and His Majesty of the differences between my sister and me. Eunuch Lee bowed slightly toward me. Thank you for the reminder, young lady. This servant will certainly report this matter to the Empress Dowager and His Majesty. After seeing Eunuch Lee off, I returned to the front hall. Before I even entered the door, I could hear Qin Jiaojiao's sobs. Mother, didn't you promise the position of Empress would definitely be mine? Why has Qin Zhenjin been chosen as Empress instead? If she becomes Empress, she'll lord it over me forever. I might as well die. I don't care, I must be Empress. If all else fails, let me take her place in the palace. After all, we look exactly the same. Mother knew that replacing the Empress without authorization was a grave crime punishable by the extermination of one's entire clan, so she didn't immediately agree to Qin Jiaojiao's proposal. Yet her expression had softened considerably. It was clear she was somewhat tempted. Seeing this, Qin Jiaojiao pressed on. Mother, do you really think Qin Zhenjin's temperament is suited to be Empress? If she were to make a fool of herself in the palace later, it would be our Prime Minister's household that loses face. You've also said I was born with the fate of a phoenix, while Qin Zhenjin is a born calamity. If she really enters the palace, she might bring disaster upon our entire family. Mother, you love Jiaojiao the most. Please, help Jiaojiao. Mother gently caressed Qin Jiaojiao's face, her eyes filled with adoration. Jiaojiao, Mother has told you before, no one shall stand in your way. I'll go to the palace first to request an audience with the Empress Dowager. As expected, it still didn't work out in the end, so you'll have to take Qin Zhenjin's place and enter the palace, but this means our precious Jiaojiao will have to suffer. Upon hearing this, Qin Jiaojiao immediately threw herself into her mother's arms, her tears turning to laughter. Meanwhile, I stood outside the door, clenching my fists tightly, feeling wronged. She took my place to enter the palace as the Empress. And now Qin Jiaojiao dares to feel wronged. Suppressing the bitterness in my heart, I closed my eyes briefly before turning back to my own courtyard. When Mother returned from the palace, her expression remained grim. Before long, panicked cries from the maidservants echoed through Qin Jiaojiao's courtyard. Qin Jiaojiao was attempting to hang herself. Yet how could she truly bear to die? This was merely her desperate ploy to force her mother into making a final decision. Sure enough, that very night, an old woman barged into my chamber, muffled my mouth, and dragged me tied up into the woodshed. Mother looked down at my disheveled state with not a trace of warmth in her eyes. Qin Zhenjin, as long as you agree to swap identities with Jiaojiao, for the sake of our mother-daughter bond, I won't make things difficult for you. After all, you're utterly unskilled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Entering the palace would only bring shame. Only a talented girl like Jiaojiao deserves to become the queen of a nation. I glared at her and demanded, Mother, I'm your daughter too, how could you be so cruel to me? But without a word, she slapped me. Enough nonsense, just tell me whether you agree or not. Back when I gave birth to you, I should have strangled you to death with my bare hands, then I wouldn't have this trouble today. My eyes burned red as I stared at my vicious mother, stubbornly refusing to comply. Suddenly, she drew a dagger from her sleeve and advanced toward me step by step. If you still refuse, I'll slash your face open with this blade. The sharp blade pressed against my face, making every hair on my body stand on end. The pain of the knife slicing through my skin in my past life flooded my mind with terrifying clarity, causing my body to tremble involuntarily. On Qin Jiaojiao's and my 5th birthday, an old Taoist priest suddenly barged into the Prime Minister's residence. He declared that between Qin Jiaojiao and me, one was born with the destiny of a phoenix, while the other was a harbinger of calamity. Mother had always favored Xu Jiaojiao. No matter how hard I tried, I could never master the lessons she assigned me, so she formed the preconceived notion that I was a troublemaker. From then on, my days in the ministerial residence grew increasingly difficult, yet I never believed I had done anything wrong, nor did I consider myself a harbinger of misfortune. So whether it was being disfigured or ultimately beaten to death by my mother, I never agreed to swap identities with Xu Jiaojiao. In this life, as the knife was about to slash my face, I cried out loudly, "Mother, I was wrong. I agree to switch identities with my sister." Only then did Mother move the dagger away from my face. She glared at me fiercely. "At least you know what's good for you." With that, she left with her maids and servants in tow. She probably wanted to deliver this good news to Qin Jiaojiao as quickly as possible. I was left locked in the pitch-dark woodshed. On the 10th day of my confinement, the palace's etiquette instructor, Madam Steward, arrived at the Prime Minister's residence in grand procession, bringing with her the Empress's wedding attire. My mother and Qin Jiaojiao welcomed them with boundless joy, but just as the head steward, Madame Gui, was helping Qin Jiaojiao with her makeup, she suddenly pointed at the back of Qin Jiaojiao's ear and shouted, "She is not the second miss of the Qin family." As Madame Gui uttered these words, all the palace maids and eunuchs turned their shocked gazes towards Qin Jiaojiao. The maids and elderly servants in the Prime Minister's residence who knew the truth all turned pale with fright. Some of the more timid ones even began to tremble slightly, unable to contain their fear. Qin Jiaojiao's face instantly turned deathly pale with fright. She looked at her mother in a panic. Her mother stepped forward, patted Qin Jiaojiao's hand reassuringly, then turned to Granny Gui and said coldly, "Granny Gui, why would you suddenly say such a thing? That's Junjun, my second daughter. Could it be that you suspect I've found a woman who looks exactly like my daughter to replace her? Junjun isn't entering the palace to suffer, she's going to be the Empress. Would I really hand over the honor of being Empress to another woman? Besides, what good would that do for me or the Prime Minister's residence?" Mother's words convinced everyone who didn't know the truth. The other 3 disciplinarian matrons who came with Matron Gui also spoke up at this moment. "Matron Gui, are you mistaken? This is indeed the second Miss Qin." "That's right, Matron Gui. As the Prime Minister's wife just said, there's no need for her to bring a fake second miss into the palace to become the Empress." "Exactly, unless they're twins. How could there be so many lookalikes in this world?" Hearing others speak up for her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corners of Mother's lips. But just then, Nanny Gui spoke up again. "According to Eunuch Li, the Prime Minister's wife has a pair of identical twin sisters. Why haven't we seen the eldest Miss Qin today?" Mother, well prepared, answered smoothly, "Jiaojiao has recently caught a slight chill and isn't fit to receive visitors. So we've let her rest quietly in her own courtyard." Nanny Gui continued with neither humility nor arrogance, "Madam, since Miss Qin is unwell, it's all the more reason for this servant to pay her a visit. Only then can I properly report back to Her Majesty the Empress Dowager, before leaving the palace. Her Majesty entrusted me with a jade pendant to be delivered to Miss Qin without fail." Her Majesty the Empress Dowager also said that after the Emperor and Empress's wedding, she would help arrange a good marriage for Miss Qin. Seeing that Madame Gui had even invoked the Empress Dowager's name, she naturally didn't dare to refuse any further. She was also afraid that reacting too strongly might arouse suspicion. She could only be grateful that she had resisted the impulse to slash my face back then, otherwise, it would have been truly difficult to explain today. Since Her Majesty the Empress Dowager holds my daughter in such high regard, it is her greatest fortune. I shall go fetch her immediately. May I trouble you to wait a moment?" "Madam." Having said this, she gave Xu Jiaojiao a reassuring glance before hurrying away. The firewood shed door was forcefully pushed open. 2 robust maidservants dragged me away. "For the past 10 days, I've only been allowed 1 meal a day and a single bowl of water, as my mother instructed. They just needed to keep me alive, so now I don't have an ounce of strength left in my body. I could only let them dress me up as they pleased." Before leaving the courtyard, my mother deliberately stepped forward to warn me. "Qin Junjun, remember what to say and what not to say when we go out. Don't even think about any sneaky ideas. You are the second young lady of our Prime Minister's residence. If anything happens to the Prime Minister's residence, you won't escape either. Be obedient. After Jiaojiao enters the palace, I'll also arrange a good marriage for you, ensuring your life won't be worse than in the palace. You and Jiaojiao are sisters born of the same mother. You must support each other from now on." I didn't speak, only nodded in response. When I arrived at Qin Jiaojiao's room supported by my maid, the palace maids and eunuchs all gasped in astonishment. How could there truly exist 2 people so strikingly alike under heaven? Mother looked at Madame Gui with a beaming smile and said, Madame Gui, this is my eldest daughter Qin Jiao Jiao, this is Madame Gui from the palace. Before I could bow to Madame Jiu, Madame Gui suddenly stepped forward to examine behind my ear. Pointing at the red mole behind my ear, she exclaimed in delight, You have a red mole behind your ear, you're the real second Miss Qin, the future Empress. Even Mother was completely dumbfounded now. She never imagined that an old palace maid who'd lived deep in the imperial quarters for years would know how to tell me apart from Qin Jiao. Qin Jiao's face flushed crimson, panic and fury making her cry out involuntarily, Nanny, this is your first time visiting our Prime Minister's residence. How could you possibly know how to tell me apart from my sister? I am Qin Zhenzhen, the future Empress. Why won't you believe me no matter what? Or have you been bribed by someone to deliberately say such things? When I enter the palace and meet the Empress Dowager and His Majesty, I will definitely tell them everything that happened today. Aunt Gui had been by the Empress Dowager's side since childhood and was one of her most trusted confidants. Even the Emperor treated her with courtesy and respect when they met. It had been a long time since anyone dared to speak rudely to her, let alone a young, unmarried girl. She let out a cold laugh and waved her hand, signaling the palace maids to take the Empress's wedding dress away again. Seeing this, Qin Jiao quickly reached out to protect the Empress's wedding dress and glared fiercely at Nanny Gui. Nanny Gui, who gave you permission to touch my wedding dress? You're nothing but a servant. I am the Empress personally appointed by the Empress Dowager and His Majesty. How dare you overstep your bounds? Nanny Gui showed not the slightest trace of fear. Miss Qin, since you insist that you are the second Miss Qin, then come with this servant to the palace to meet the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager once met the second Miss Qin in person. I'm certain her judgment will not be mistaken. At these words, both Mother and Qin Jiao's expressions changed repeatedly. I abruptly raised my head to look at Madame Gui. I truly couldn't recall when I might have seen Her Majesty the Empress Dowager before, all these years. Mother had rarely allowed us to attend any banquets, all to maintain Qin Jiao's aura of mystery, let alone entering the imperial palace. Seeing that Matron Gui seemed somewhat angered, Mother quickly stepped forward to smooth things over. Auntie Gui, please don't be angry. Zhenzhen is a simple-minded child who always speaks her mind without thinking. Without being summoned, entering the palace uninvited would violate court regulations. To others, my two daughters may look exactly alike. But as their mother, I naturally know their differences. You're absolutely right, Auntie. One of my daughters does indeed have a red mole behind her ear, but it's not Zhenzhen, it's Jiao. Come quickly and explain to Nanny Gui. As she spoke, Mother gave my arm a firm pinch, signaling me to speak up and explain. I curled the corners of my lips and said with a smile, Nanny Gui, you didn't see wrong. I am indeed Qin Zhenzhen, the second young miss of the Prime Minister's residence. Mother forced me to swap identities with my sister so she could enter the palace in my place. She seemed shocked by my audacity in laying bare the entire truth. Mother trembled with rage, pointing at me. She roared, You wretched girl, how dare you say such things? Even if you're jealous that your sister was named Empress, you can't commit such treasonous acts. You're dragging the entire Prime Minister's residence down with you to the grave. How could I have raised such a venomous daughter? No wonder everyone calls you a cursed star. I must beat you to death today, or this household will never know peace. With that, she shot a meaningful glance at the maids standing beside me, signaling them to seize me and drag me out. But I, who had long been prepared, quickly stepped forward to stand by Madame Gui. Didn't Madame Gui say that Her Majesty the Empress Dowager has met me and can distinguish who between my sister and I is the real Qin Zhenzhen? Since Mother suspects I'm an imposter, why not accompany us to the palace to meet Her Majesty the Empress Dowager? Madame Gui chimed in. Young Lady Qin is absolutely right. Madam Prime Minister, it's not too late to order the execution after we've determined who the imposter really is. No matter how unwilling her mother and Qin Jiao were, they had no choice but to follow Lady Gui into the palace. They knew full well that admitting their attempt to replace the reigning empress would mean certain death for them. They were betting that even if the Empress Dowager had truly seen me before, when Qin Jiao and I appeared together, she might not be able to tell which of us was who. We arrived at the Empress Dowager's Shoan Palace. When I clearly saw the face of the Empress Dowager seated above, I couldn't help but exclaim, Grandma. A year ago, Mother took Qin Jiao with her to stay at her maternal home for a while, leaving me alone in the mansion. I finally had a few rare days of leisure. And since no one paid me any attention anyway, I sneaked out of the mansion. Who would have thought I'd run into a thief snatching an old woman's money pouch? Out of kindness, I helped the old woman. A few days later, I unexpectedly ran into that same old woman again at the tea house. We had a delightful conversation. After that, we would meet at the tea house every month to chat. This back and forth led us to become familiar with each other, forming what others called an unlikely friendship across generations. Though I'd heard the Empress Dowager was only about 50 years old, she still retained a childlike spirit and enjoyed sneaking out of the palace. But I never could have imagined that elderly woman would turn out to be the current Empress Dowager. No wonder the Empress Dowager specifically requested me, even though my mother hadn't sent my portrait to the palace, in my previous life. After Qin Jiaojiao replaced me and entered the palace, did the Empress Dowager realize she wasn't me? I was so shocked that I actually forgot to pay my respects to the Empress Dowager. Eunuch Li stood beside the Empress Dowager, appearing stern but actually giving me a gentle reminder. Second Miss Qin, you must pay your respects to the Empress Dowager. I immediately knelt down and kowtowed. Under the astonished gazes of everyone, the Empress Dowager slowly walked up to me and personally helped me up from the ground. Junjun, between you and me, there's no need for such formalities. After speaking, she shifted her gaze to my mother and Qin Jiaojiao, who were still kneeling on the ground, her eyes sharp and piercing. Madam Prime Minister, you truly have some nerve. It seems you paid no heed to what this dowager said to you that day. Didn't I make it clear to you? This dowager only recognizes Junjun as my daughter-in-law. How dare you send your other daughter to impersonate her? Mother turned deathly pale at the dowager's words. For the longest time, she couldn't utter a single coherent sentence. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, this humble wife, the Empress Dowager snorted coldly. On the day the decree was announced, Eunuch Li had already informed this grieving one. He saw a red mole behind the ear of the second miss of the Qin family. Fearing that Matron Gui might mistake the person, I specifically informed her of this matter. Fortunately, this grieving one had the foresight, or else you would have truly succeeded in your scheme to swap the baby for a cat. I shall report this matter truthfully to His Majesty, and the decision on how to handle it will be entirely up to him. Seeing that the truth was completely exposed, my mother could only kowtow repeatedly, begging for mercy. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, this humble subject was merely momentarily possessed by demons. Please spare this humble subject and Jiaojiao this once. Considering I am Junjun's birth mother and Jiaojiao is Junjun's elder sister, moreover, Junjun and His Majesty are about to be married, the current Empress cannot have a mother who is guilty of a crime. The mother's words caused the Empress Dowager to frown slightly. This scandal indeed cannot be widely publicized. Otherwise, if the court officials and the common people learn that the Empress has such a malicious mother, they will surely voice their objections. Noticing the Empress Dowager's wavering, I suddenly clutched my head and fainted directly to the ground. When I awoke again, I was already lying in a side chamber of the Shokong Palace. The Empress Dowager was looking at me with deep concern. Junjun, the imperial physician says your health is very weak. What exactly is wrong with you? I didn't speak, only the corners of my eyes turned red as tears continuously streamed down my face. Junjun, don't cry, tell me what wrongs you've suffered, and I will see justice done for you. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, my mother locked me in the woodshed without food or water so my sister could take my place. She even said that once my sister becomes Empress, she would have me killed. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, I almost couldn't see you again. You foolish girl, what nonsense are you spouting? When did I ever say I would kill you? Just wait until we return home, I'll beat you to death for this. My mother was so furious she forgot all propriety, pointing directly at my nose as she roared, outrageous. The Empress Dowager angrily slammed the table. Prime Minister's wife. Who do you want to beat to death? While I'm still sitting here, you dare treat Junjun like this? It seems you couldn't possibly have been kind to her in daily life. No wonder you came up with the idea of having your favored daughter replace your unfavored one. Even going so far as to lock your own flesh and blood in the woodshed to starve to death. Even a vicious tiger doesn't devour its own cubs. Who would have thought the Honorable Prime Minister's wife could be more ruthless than wolves and tigers? The mother knelt on the ground once again. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, this humble wife is innocent. I've been wronged. No matter how much I may dislike Junjun, she is still my own flesh and blood. Born from my womb after 10 months of pregnancy, I couldn't love her enough. How could I possibly harm her to death? Seeing her mother continuously kowtowing for mercy, Qin Jiaojiao could no longer suppress the rage and jealousy in her heart, and blurted out recklessly, Qin Junjun, how vicious your heart is. Why do you wrong my mother like this? Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, I admit that replacing her was my mother's and my fault, but we had no choice but to do so. May Her Majesty the Empress Dowager see clearly. With that, Qin Jiaojiao even performed an exaggerated kowtow towards the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager looked at Qin Jiaojiao with a faint, enigmatic smile and asked, "Then tell me, what kind of helplessness could have driven you and your mother to commit the crime of deceiving the Emperor? Your Majesty, my sister already has a lover. Mother and I were only concerned that my sister might bring shame to the royal family, which is why we lost our senses and came up with such a plan." For a moment, the entire bedchamber fell into complete silence. The Empress Dowager turned her head to look at me, though the tenderness in her eyes had noticeably diminished. "Zhenzhen, is what your sister said true?" I quickly denied. "I beg your Majesty to see clearly. This humble subject has no lover. If your Majesty doesn't believe me, you may send someone to investigate." Before the Empress Dowager could speak, Qin Jiaojiao shouted at me, "Qin Zhenzhen, how dare you act without taking responsibility? Don't think I don't know you sneaked out to the tea house on the 6th day of last month. If it wasn't to secretly meet your lover, why would you be grinning so happily?" Mother immediately chimed in, "Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, it is entirely my fault for failing to properly educate my daughter, which led to today's scandal. When I learned that Zhenzhen was secretly meeting her lover, I tried to dissuade her many times. But a grown daughter won't listen to her mother no matter how earnestly I pleaded. Zhenzhen simply wouldn't heed my advice. Later, when your Majesty and the Emperor decided to make Zhenzhen the Empress, I feared her secret would be exposed. That's why I came up with such a foolish plan. Moreover, it was Zhenzhen herself who proposed this idea. Jiaojiao couldn't bear to see her younger sister separated from her beloved, so she agreed to take Zhenzhen's place and enter the palace. But who would have thought Zhenzhen would later covet wealth and glory, actually going back on her word at the last moment? Whatever the case may be, it's all my fault as her mother. If Her Majesty the Empress Dowager truly wishes to punish someone, let the punishment fall on me alone." Mother spoke through tears and sniffles. She genuinely appeared the very picture of a loving mother desperately concerned for her daughter. I chuckled softly at that moment. "What are you laughing at?" Qin Jiaojiao's tone carried a hint of flustered irritation. Ignoring her, I instead turned a beaming smile toward the Empress Dowager seated beside me. "Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, so it turns out you were my beloved all along." The Empress Dowager also laughed, tapping my nose playfully. "You little rascal." Both my mother and Qin Jiaojiao were utterly dumbfounded by this scene. I kindly enlightened them. "I do often sneak out of the mansion. But the person I meet isn't some lover, it's Her Majesty the Empress Dowager." "The Empress Dowager? How is that possible?" Qin Jiaojiao couldn't believe my words at all. The Empress Dowager nodded. "Indeed, it was this old one. I've been acquainted with Zhenzhen for a long time." Qin Jiaojiao was completely speechless. But I still had questions for Qin Jiaojiao. "Qin Jiaojiao, you saw me sneaking out of the mansion that day, so was it you who released the venomous snake?" "I usually go out through the back door. To reach the back door from my courtyard, one must cross a stretch of grassland. Though few people go there, servants still tend to it. Yet that very day when I returned, countless colorful venomous snakes suddenly slithered out from the grass. If I hadn't reacted quickly and dodged, I would have truly been bitten to death by those venomous snakes." Hearing my question, Qin Jiaojiao trembled her lips, remaining silent for a long while. Only her evasive eyes dared not look in my direction. Seeing this scene, how could anything remain unclear to me? My dear mother and beloved sister both wish for my immediate death. Out of concern for my reputation, the Empress Dowager ultimately chose not to handle this matter publicly. She merely arranged for Qin Jiaojiao to be married off to the Shu region, never to return to the capital again. As for my mother, under the pretense of recuperating from illness, she was sent to a manor in the outskirts of the city to be kept under strict surveillance. On the day I was sent to the manor, my mother's venomous gaze never left me. "Qin Zhenzhen, how could you be so cruel? Your sister was raised in luxury since childhood. Sending her to marry in that godforsaken place of Shu is practically a death sentence. I am your mother, yet you actually drove me out to the manor. Qin Zhenzhen, you truly are vicious. Why must you oppose me at every turn? I should have strangled you at birth." Strangled you. Listening to her vicious words, recalling my miserable fate in my past life, I couldn't help but feel the corners of my eyes redden as a cold fury spread through my gaze. "Mother, am I not also your daughter? Why do you hate me so much? Since childhood, your favoritism toward elder sister was one thing. But why did you want me dead? In your eyes, sister was superior in every way, yet ironically, it was I who ultimately ascended to the position of empress. As for my sister, she'll have to fend for herself." Mother completely abandoned all pretense of manners and decorum, screaming curses at me. Qin Zhenjin, you're no daughter of mine, you're nothing but a debt-collecting curse. I curse you to die a wretched death. I sneered coldly and had the servant beside me gag her incessant cursing mouth. After Mother was sent away, I began to peacefully study palace etiquette and rituals under Madame Gui's guidance. On the day of the grand wedding, the weather was exceptionally fine. Clad in crimson wedding robes, I boarded the Phoenix palanquin, gradually approaching the towering palace halls. In my past life, I died by the blade of my closest kin. In this life, I would rather be the butcher's knife than the fish on the chopping block. In the second year of my reign as Empress, I successfully bore the Emperor his first son. On the child's full moon celebration, the Emperor immediately named him Crown Prince. In the fourth year of my reign as Empress, news came from Shu that Qin Jiaojiao had died in childbirth, a tragic loss of both mother and child. The news reached Zhuangzi, and that very night, my mother hanged herself. In the 20th year of my reign as Empress, the Emperor passed away, and the Crown Prince ascended the throne. At last, I found myself seated in the very position the author Qin Jiaojiao had occupied in my previous life. In this lifetime, I have achieved fulfillment.